I shared the link around, so you never know, you know, you're gonna get Zoom bombed, right? That's the.
Hi. Don't throw this down there.
Yeah, I mean, I got Zoom bombed once. I kind of.
And then make sure that, do we have, do you have, yes, absolutely. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Lyria's going to introduce you. So I want to welcome everybody on behalf of the Logan, friends of the Logan Square Library. We're going to be recording. The other thing I had requested is.
Andrew's doing a presentation.
If you haven't muted your microphone, maybe mute it.
Please mute yourself if you're not.
And they can't hear this supposedly. You're muted. I'm not on there. I'm in my face. Did my face go away?
That's
got rid of my face. It's so ugly. Close that out.
Oh, notification. Mom, would you be so good as to mute yourself?
Please, thank you.
What did I say?
Mute yourself.
Yeah.
How do I do that?
I don't know.
I don't want my picture on there. Just get out of there. I don't care. I don't know how to do it. Just shut it off.
Okay.
We all have parents, right? Nobody's gonna you're right.
Right.
So,
or we are.
No, just let me finish, Rhea.
Okay, go ahead. How do we start? Is Rhea gonna start?
I'm trying to start. So the Friends of the Logan Square Library have been around since about 2015, and our purpose is to promote the library as an essential institution and encourage people to use it. We have programs on a almost monthly basis. So tonight we welcome Andrew Schneider. Rhea is going to introduce Andrew. He's going to talk about social clubs in Logan Square. Just two more things. We are recording this. And it'll be posted on our Facebook page. I will put the link to our Facebook page in the chat. And the other thing I request is that if people could post in the chat how they found out about this would be very helpful for our planning. And finally, I'd like people to mute themselves and hold their questions until the end. You can either type the question in the chat, or you can wait till Andrew is through with his presentation and ask them then. Okay. So Rhea, can you please introduce Andrew?
Oh, I would be glad to introduce Andrew. I have known Andrew, I think about 6 years when I started with the house walk that Logan Square Preservation supports and sponsors. And I have always been so impressed with his knowledge of Logan Square, and I think I'm not the only one who refers to you as our local historian. Andrew, you lived here how many years? 20 years in Logan Square, and he's the president. Yeah, and he's been the president of Logan Square Preservation for 10 years. I was going to say it was forever. Was there a president before you?
Let me tell you what.
Yeah, it does. So anyway, his focus has been the neighborhood history, building a historic archive and sharing and promoting the history of Logan Square. He lives on Logan and has 3 children. He still works as a writer as well as a realtor, but his true love is unearthing new gems about the neighborhood's history, whether they be photographs, what was this word?
Ephemera.
Ephemera, right. I can read it, I just can't say it. And other artifacts. So we look forward to hearing today about social clubs that existed in Logan Square, and many of them no longer are in existence. So Andrew, if you will please inform us, and we'll be good listeners.
Sounds great.
And I will mute myself.
That's marvelous. Thank you. If I can share my screen, I'll start. I have a little slideshow, and
Should be
I'll
able-
do my best to produce a really great. Hold on a minute. Here. How do I? Aha! Here it is.
Yeah, you should be able to.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I start with a delightful cover photo that the folks at the Friends of the Logan Square Library put together for me. I think a lot of people are unfamiliar. The built environment of Logan Square changed a great deal in 1895 when the Metropolitan Elevated arrived from Chicago. It arrived at Kedzie, just south of the auditorium. It predates the auditorium, but when that happened, Logan Square became, rather than a sleepy sort of farming community, it became a center of commerce. And with commerce came entertainment, and it came social clubs. So I don't have this picture later in the presentation. I should have perhaps included it, but I want to note the gentleman that you see there in the bow tie that is shaking hands right sort of in the center of that photograph. That man is today the King of Norway. So he was here in Logan Square. He was Prince Olaf at that time. He later visited as King Olaf as well, but it's worth sort of noting that happened. So but what's interesting is that the club he's in is what was once known as the Chicago Norski Club, and the Norski Club was at the 2350 North Kedzie Boulevard. That building is still standing. If you guys if you watched WTTW last week, I believe Jeffrey Baird did a segment on the Norski Club. It's got some dragons still up on the roof line right below the roof, and the Norski Club was essentially a professional club. It started off as a little professional club, doctors, lawyers, and all sorts of professionals. And its first home, and forgive me for the quality of this next image, was located at Milwaukee and Kedzie. And it's hard to see in this image, but if you see where my mouse is, this little turret here, that's Milwaukee Avenue, that's Kedzie, and this grass is where Logan Square is today. Okay, and you'll see a name here that's very bitmapped, but it's Joachim Guyver. Guyver was the architect was one of the architects who built the Norski Club at 2350 North Kedzie. He was also the architect of the steel framework for the Statue of Liberty and the architect for the Jewelers Building downtown, if you guys can picture the Jewelers Building on Wacker Drive. So a really noted architect. There is the building right there. You guys can see it. It was a mixed use building, but it was sort of the first club. And they all, the Norwegians got together there and they sort of plotted, where are we going to build a clubhouse? Now, why would the Norwegians build a clubhouse in Logan Square? Well, just like today, this sort of ethnic community of Norwegians congregated in Logan Square and thereabouts. There was a 1924 history of the neighborhood that was written by the pastor of the Fourth Congregational Church. If anybody's around that remembers the Fourth Congregational Church, and it's certainly colorful, the history. But one of the things that they said was, well, this area was attractive to Scandinavian people because it was beyond the fire line. The fire line was where the city said beyond which you can build out of wood frame instead of brick. The fire line was North Avenue and it was Western. So here where we live in Logan Square, you could build out of frame instead of building out of brick. And for some reason, the pastor of the Fourth Congregational Church concluded, well, those Swedes and those Norwegians, they really like frame buildings. And so they really wanted to live in Logan Square. That may very well be apocryphal, but that's what he said. Ultimately, Joachim Guyver and his partner Dinkelberg designed this building. This building is actually what stands today at 2350 North Kedzie. The building to the right was lost to fire. It's now, but a lot of its terracotta was saved actually, but it's now where Mark Fishman's office is. It's part of that whole development. Part of this was all converted by a condo developer actually, so it bears very little resemblance to the picture you're seeing here now. We've lost the sort of the cross dragons here at the top. Those were actually cut off with like a sawzall, which, if you can believe that, the developer decided that was too ethnic. They tore down this gable here. They completely redid this circular window. So a lot changed. But the clubhouse itself, they were very into patronizing the arts. And so, by the way, in case you're wondering, the angled parking that exists there still on Kedzie Boulevard, You can see here, these are some cars. What, these are 1940s, 1950s cars. There's been angled parking in front of that building for a good long time, maybe a century. But the club itself, all the interior finishes were actually artist designed. So here you see the high seat, right? This was used on festive occasions. You saw the picture where Olav, the crown prince, was standing in front of it. All of these little sort of these little emblems here, these are all the coats of arms of various Norwegian cities. And this mural is itself a mural of Leif Erikson discovering Vinland, right? So this was the Norwegians laying claim. They had a founding American partner, right? They could be part of the myth of the American founding. But the whole interior was designed by artists, and it had a variety of spaces. It had, this is a picture of the whole hall, and you see a fireplace on the right. If you can kind of like collapse your chats there, you'll see the high seat on the left, the fireplace on the right. You really see it's a really dramatic space. The lanterns, the light fixtures that are there, those were all designed by an artist named Emil Bjorn, and I brought one back from Decorah, Iowa. The Vesterheim Museum of the Norwegian diaspora has a good chunk of the artistic material that was removed from the Norski Club, and they sent one of these back so that it would hang at the Minikirken. So if you're interested in seeing a little piece of that history, you can come to a Logan Square preservation meeting or a Taste of Norway or a Sunday service at the Minikirken. Oops, where am I here? But they had, sort of every space you might imagine, right? Here's a library space that was in the Norski Club, and you can see the newspaper rack on the right. They had a juniors room. This was the juniors room, and you see that circular window. That was the one that looked out over Kedzie Boulevard, and all these, all those faces are all sort of these Norwegian folk type faces. Here's a close up of the fireplace. This fireplace is actually an interesting story because it's still in the building today. It was designed by a guy named Charles, and I'm gonna butcher his name, but Baggy, and he was one of the artists or the architects that actually drafted illustrations for Daniel Burnham's plan of Chicago. And then just some further photographs of the hall itself. Here's actually, you can see it was operating up until here's the 80s, right? And they had a party here. You see the fireplace in the background. And then ultimately, this is a story from 1983 when they started. This was in the Sun Times, and they were really struggling to figure out what to do with it. The Norwegian community by this time had largely moved to the suburbs, and they used to have big parades. 17. Mai, which if those folks know, I'm wearing my Norwegian hat today. 17. Mai is Norwegian Constitution Day. It's the day they celebrate their independence, the creation of the Norwegian state, and they used to have that parade through Humboldt Park, past the Leif Erikson statue, and up into Logan Square, where so many Norwegian institutions existed. But so many of them have moved to the suburbs that by the late 90s, when they were still operating, the Sons of Norway at that time were operating this building. They were actually leasing it to quinceañeras. They were having any sort of event they could, weddings, quinceañeras. And I know the story of at least one former 35th Ward alderman who, as a young man, would sneak into the quinceañeras in this building. So it was still a center of culture, even as the neighborhood changed. And I just wanted to include this. This was from an exhibit at the Vesterheim, but you see they had their own custom china. They had their own custom silverware. They had their own, it was a real elaborate thing. And this is the high seat that you saw earlier. It's deconstructed and on exhibit at the Vesterheim here. Okay, Max, I'm sorry. That's my son. But this is the, this is the mural I mentioned, and you'll see the multiple panels where Leif Erikson, speaks to this sort of kingly figure, sets out on his voyage, and then they discover Vinland, which they called for the grapes. Would you see them holding the grapes, then you see them giving thanks. And so this was this giant. I'm told it's actually 8 feet tall. So to give you a sense of the scale of this actual piece of art. Now, this is how, and I'm going to talk about preservation in a sort of rubber meets the road context, but this is how it was converted into a condo unit. So you can see the scope of the fireplace, right, which is actually taller than the kitchen cabinets to the left. So if we all sit in our kitchens, we can imagine the size of this. I did actually went out and found somebody who was so interested in the Fireplace, that they actually purchased this, and I convinced them to take care of the woodwork and really bring it back to what it was. So I want you guys to note here on the right, you can see this beam here is carved, and there's actually dragons in there. It's hard to see, but they're dragons. And you can see that there's a little sort of right here, there's a suggestion of it. And I actually convinced him to spend some money, and he brought it back to this. So today, that's what this space looks like. It's all been fully restored, and you see the woodwork stripped and restored, and you can see the restoration of this panel here, where there's a carved dragon and woodwork. So finding ways to bring people into spaces that are actually going to care for them is a good chunk of what I do, and that's a little bit about the rubber meets the road component of preservation here in the neighborhood. This is a history book that was written in 1950, as you see, about the Chicago Norski Club, and I use it as a transition into our next discussion. So this person here, Otto Clausen, he wrote that history of the Norski Club, which you see on the right, and I found this photograph of him in a book for the next social club I want to talk about, which is the Normaninis Singing Society Clubhouse. Most of us might know this as the Kriya Yoga Temple. But it was this. Here it is in 1919. They purchased it. This is literally a singing society, and they were a bunch of. It was all men, and they got together and they would practice Norwegian folk songs, and they would sing, and they would then give concerts in the space. And in the 1940s, they actually built the addition that makes the clubhouse looks like it looks today, with the limestone addition on the front, and it wrapped around and enclosed this porte cochere, and actually created also sort of a concert hall in sort of a half basement in the rear of the building. This is where I got that picture. It's a book. It's a book of a program from their concert. You see Otto Clausen is the director. You see it was founded in 1870, and they're actually having it at the Logan Square Masonic Temple, which was located directly across the street. What's interesting about this book is it's one of a couple that I've noticed here when you talk about concentrated ethnic communities. This book, I actually have it sitting here in front of me, and I'll show you. If you can pay attention to me for a moment. Here's the book. And while the ads are in English, the text, if you can see, the text is entirely Norwegian. The text of I have a similar book from St. John Birchman's, which was a Belgian church, where the text is entirely in Flemish. And it's interesting to think today, when Logan Square Preservation talks about sending out a zoning notice or any sort of communication, we talk about we want to make sure that is translated into Spanish, depending on where it is. We talk about translating into Polish, but about 90 years ago, it was Flemish, and it was Norwegian, and it was Swedish too. This is, once they did put the addition on the clubhouse, you can see here what the actual clubhouse looked like. So you have all these various rooms, and these are all in sort of the basement of that building. Here's the front entryway. Here's the Nordic room. Here's the mural room. Now this mural in the back, I'll show you another photograph of, but it depicts a lot of important features of Norwegian society and Norwegian history, and it was executed by a muralist named John Cadell, who was a really famous muralist in the middle of the century, middle of the 20th century. And then this is the Skal room, and Skal, of course, being sort of Cheers, right? It's the bar, and it also had a series of murals here. Now, all those murals are actually in storage or in the heritage room at what's the heaven's sakes, Norwood Crossing up in Norwood Park, which is a Norwegian institution. I also include this photo because I sort of chuckle about all these things and the random connections one has to the neighborhood. This is the practice room in the clubhouse. So you see here, what I love, of course, about this is if anyone's sung in their life, and I was once a singer, though, it's mostly confined to the car and the shower these days. The ashtray sort of right here in the center is really, there's nothing like a good cigarette as you're leading into your choral practice. But the reason I include this photo, besides showing you sort of life in the club, is that this man here, his name is Wayne Spees, and he was not only directing the choir here and was very involved in the Normaninis Singing Society, he was also the music director at the Minikirken. So he was for decades in charge of all the music programming at the Minikirken. And he was honored by the King of Norway for he got a medal and a big award for promoting Norwegian culture in the United States. And he also happened to be my piano teacher. And I will note that, which is kind of a bizarre thing, right? I have his, I was looking through my old piano books and I got a signature where he graduated me from level 2 to level 3. And before anyone thinks otherwise, I was definitely a disappointing student. This is the mural I was referring to earlier. And you can actually see where they've labeled all these things one by one. Number 10 is a statue of Grieg, but you see all these different, you know, Ibsen, and maybe Ibsen Ibsen and Oslo and Grieg might be the only thing like most Americans will know of. But this mural has actually been reproduced in Norwood Crossing. The original is rolled up and sitting in a boiler room at Norwood Crossing, I think, which is something that breaks my heart to this day. So I want to move on to another club institution that was sort of directly across the street. You might recognize, if you look at the waists of these men standing here, they're Masons, right? And this is the cornerstone laying ceremony for the Logan Square Masonic Temple, which was constructed and still stands at the corner of Albany, well, what was once Catalpa, but is today Albany and Kedzie, almost directly across the street from the Normaninis Society at 2414 Kedzie. The first home for this institution was actually at 3111 West Logan Boulevard, which is right on Logan Square. It's currently where the L Trench is, so that building no longer exists. But they went from there, and then they went into a place called Kimball Hall, which was at Drummond and Kimball. And what's interesting about this, you can see there, this is the Logan Square Lodge, right? And if anybody's sharp-eyed and paying attention, they can see that that is a square. The triangular shape is a square, and that the person that's in it is John Logan, General John Logan. So the logo for the Logan Square Masonic Temple is, in fact, Logan Square. But a lot of people don't understand that the Masonic temple that was constructed there, which if you don't know it today, it's the Armitage Baptist Church. It was actually a business venture in addition to being a clubhouse. And so you see here, these are all stock certificates that were actually found in the attic, the garage rafters space of a building in Antioch. A guy got in touch with me and handed them all over to us. They're all in Logan Square Preservation's collection today. But people invested in it. The idea was that this building was going to pay off its note, and then it was going to generate a return in addition to being a clubhouse space. And it was not only a center for the Masons, but it was a space that was available for many people to do concerts and to do events, private events. And we in Logan Square Preservation have, this is the building, of course, if you recognize it. The pastor once told me I must be angry with him because, you see, this was all raised lettering. And when he bought it with the church, they went up there with a grinder and they ground off that entire Logan Square Masonic Temple lettering, which was all raised. So now it's just a flat limestone panel up there, just a shadow of the name. And it was designed by Clarence Hatzfeld. And so you'll see in the building to this day, this is the end panel of the theater chairs, but you see it's a Logan Square Masonic Temple emblem that was designed by Hatzfeld. You'll see the same thing on the doorknobs throughout the temple, Logan Square Masonic Temple. These rooms, which I'll show you, still exist. They're in varying states of either repair or disrepair or change. This one's in really good shape, but it's not like it is here. You can see this was the Egyptian hall. So it was all designed to be on an Egyptian motif. This has all been painted over, but you can see here these Egyptian type decorative features. All these light fixtures are gone. And then this wooden floor, this hardwood floor, it had seen so much action from dancing over the years that they actually had to take the whole thing up and replace it because it creaked so badly when they bought it for the church. And you can see here's a ticket from presumably at the Egyptian Hall. And here's Jimmy Durante that's going to play the Egyptian Hall. Here's the Norwegian American Athletic Association Turners. The Turners was an athletic association. And they were also, you know, here they are in 1926. They're doing an event at the Masonic Temple. Hold on. Here's Nick Massey and his orchestra. If you don't know who Nick Massey is, he was a member of the Four Seasons, if you remember the Four Seasons. But he was doing an event here. You see on the ticket on the right says the Ionian Lounge. Well, the Ionian Lounge looked like this. This space is still there today. It's in a state of what I might describe as glorious decay. It is a gymnasium. It's used as a gymnasium. And so right about here, they've got a basketball hoop. But the building, the space itself still exists with these columns in various conditions, and then the skylight. All the art glass is gone, but the skylights are all still there. It's really an extraordinary place. I know they've been on Open House Chicago before. If you have the opportunity to go inside, I really encourage you. Here's a 1940 ticket from the Young Republicans Club, which I haven't heard much about them lately here in Logan Square, but perhaps they're still meeting. And you can see that they're holding their event in the Pompeian and Moorish rooms at the Logan Square Masonic Temple. This was the Moorish room. And the Moorish room is sort of in the basement. It's still there today. It's actually been cut up into several pieces, but the floor is still there. This staircase is still there. This entry is still there. And actually, a lot of this furniture still sort of like floats around the building, which is fascinating when you think about that. It was attached to the Pompeian room. And you see here the Primrose Athletic Association is giving an event in the Pompeian room. And this is what the Pompeian room looked like. So you can see it's hard to tell, but these are all sort of friezes that are all sort of designed based on the sort of painting that you might have found at Pompeii, at the architectural site of Pompeii. You can see sort of the waves here on the columns. And I will tell you, all this room, the floor is still there, the columns are still there, the stage is still there. Almost everything else is gone. So light fixtures have been removed, and most of everything on the walls has been painted over. But a lot of the bones still remain. This was called the American Hall. I include this just because it's such an extraordinary space and gives you a sense of the scope and size of the Logan Square Masonic Temple. It's a gigantic building with a lot of mixed-use spaces. And so when you think about it, this was a block south of the Logan Square Blue Line stop. And so, hordes of people, enormous numbers of people, the whole northwest side would get off at the Logan Square Blue Line stop. And then what are they going to do? Well, they can drive home, but it's a Friday night. Maybe you want to take a concert in at the Logan Square Auditorium, which still exists, or maybe you want to go down to the Masonic Temple, right? There, who knows who's playing at the Masonic Temple, or one event was going on. Moving on. Does anyone, I'm sure, recognizes this? Today it's known as the Stan Mansion. It had kind of an interesting history, but you can see here it is as the Humboldt Park Commandery and Clubhouse and Asylum, and asylum meaning not crazy, but a place of peace for the Knights Templar. Now I struggle to really understand the Knights Templar, but I lots of little architects pop around, and I might show you. I managed to lay my hands on a Knights Templar sword, so I do in fact have a sword that would have been carried by these folks in their ceremonial functions. But the Knights Templar purchased this building, which was a house. It was built in the 1890s as a really elaborate house. And then they built this giant addition. And the addition came with things like this hall, which you can see it has an Egyptian pattern as well, because they were affiliated with the Masons. But this space is used for weddings and events today. I went to an LSNA event that was once held here. Here's the billiard room that was down at the clubhouse. And here you can see the Commandery Clubhouse decorated for Christmas. So it was a real elaborate thing. And perhaps the greatest event to come out of this clubhouse located here in Logan Square was the 72nd annual conclave of Illinois Knights Templar. So the whole state, they all got together and they marched from Logan Square. You can see here it is. It's 1928, September and October of 1928. And they met in Logan Square and they marched down Kedzie Boulevard past the clubhouse. And you can see in the background here, there's our Logan Square monument. If you're wondering what this is, it's the water tower for the old Buick dealership that used to stand there. You'll see it in some historic photographs. And you see David written here. That's actually Grace's Furniture building right there. But here they are marching down Kedzie Boulevard. And here they are marching and making their turn. And you see all their plumed hats and everyone gathered together. This is the south side of Palmer Square.
I regret it because I locked the inside from the inside of
Sorry, could someone mute themselves?
the door.
So your door is locked shut.
And I tried to use the key and I can't get it open.
Somebody's speaking. I'm not sure who's unmuted, but whoever the host is, could you perhaps mute, make sure everyone's muted? Well, it's quiet again. All right, I'll resume. So here they are, the Knights Templar, marching down as part of this grand review down the south side of Palmer Square, and then turning onto Humboldt Boulevard so that they would march down. And there was a big band, like sort of grandstand down on in Humboldt Park, where they then sort of did maneuvers, and almost like a marching band, but no music. I struggle to comprehend this entire event, but it was a thing, and everybody wrote about it. What I might point out while I pause on this photograph is, if you see this little turret here, just above the trees, this is the site of the St. Sylvester School today. But at the time, it was the home of Ignaz Schwinn, who was one of the two founders of the Schwinn Bicycle Company. He left that house and the entire block there to the St. Sylvester Church, and they built the school on it. Oops, gotta go back to my. Here's yet another clubhouse. All these are on Kedzie Boulevard. I don't know if you guys have followed along with this yet, but they're all on Kedzie Boulevard. This is the Chicago Society. The Chicago Society still exists today, and it's a Polish organization. And a lot of people don't understand, but Logan Square and Avondale both were a center of relocation of displaced persons from Poland following World War II. And they also had their own clubhouse and civic and charitable organization. And this is the last building. It's now Smart Love Preschool. I don't know if anybody's sort of familiar with this, but it's the very last building on Kedzie just before it turns onto Palmer Square. And it had a lot of the things you'll see in all these other clubhouses. It had, it had a meeting hall, and it had a bar and restaurant, and it had a library and foyer. And you can even see here, I love the sort of 50s, 60s sort of palm trees and tiki room down there, the Polynesian room. Which brings us sort of to our last ethnic club, an ethnic community that I wanted to talk about, which is the Belgian community. Now, unlike the Norwegians and the Scandinavians and the Polish that really had a strong presence here, the Belgian community existed, but it wasn't as robust a community. There were Belgians here, but they would kind of come from everywhere, because St. John Birchman's on Logan Boulevard was their ethnic church. And I share this article here because you can see this greeting, and Cardinal Vernier, who is a sort of a hero of World War I, came to, and if you know your World War I history, King Albert I resisted the German advance through Belgium, and that was this sort of heroic moment of Belgian history. And so the Cardinal came here, and 10,000 people were gathered out on Logan Boulevard in front of the church. And I know what you're asking is, how on earth is this related to social clubs? Well, there was a Belgian social club here too. And this club building still exists. It's right on Fullerton at Tallman. It was actually just recently purchased, and then they got a zoning change, and there's sort of a building that appears to be swallowing up the Belgian club. But it's kind of set up, I believe it's a house, and then there's a storefront next door. And I'm going to zoom in here in a moment, but you'll see, if you know the history of Belgium, you'll know it's multiple ethnic groups, right? You have sort of the Belgian French, you have the Flemish, and the Walloons. And as you get closer, you'll see that there's a stone here, and it's there, and it reads, "All Belgians are equal." The interesting part about this history, which is really worth noting, is that not only, so this is the interior, not only was it a center, as you see, of relief here in World War II, as Red Cross relief, but it was also the precursor of the Service Employees International Union. It was founded by the Belgian Janitors Union. It was a whole immigrant Belgian community, and they went around and they fed boilers. They shoveled coal into boilers in multiple flat buildings. They took out trash. They did a lot of things, and they created it. In fact, if you go and look up sort of like the labor history of Chicago, you'll find this building and site on that list, because this was the the precursor to SEIU, the Belgian Janitors Association or Union. And the building, as I said, still exists to this day. The Belgian community actually tried to buy it back when it came up for sale as an estate. It was in much this condition, a little deteriorated, but it looked like this in the interior. But the owner, who was sort of on his last legs, really had a distaste for some reason to the idea of selling it back to the Belgians. so it wasn't done. But the Belgian community really did it was still robust, and they did have this function. And here you can see them marching from St. John Birchman's, and they would do this. You saw this in the earlier photograph, where they marched back and forth between the club at Tallman and Fullerton to the church at Rockwell and Logan. Hold on one moment, I'm sorry. Forgive me. And I just want to share some further photographs of folks gathered outside of the clubhouse. And if you look on Google Maps, you'll see this building there. And I think, what's particularly interesting a lot about this is that this is the documentary evidence we have for these social clubs. But they weren't the only social entities, the social entities and clubs and cultural centers of culture, which are really largely lacking in Logan Square today. We don't have the Masonic Temple anymore. We don't have the Normaninis Singing Society. We don't have the Norski Club. But when the Cubans arrived, we did have a club called Tanya's. And I'm not sure if anybody is on the call that knows or remembers Tanya's. I don't, but I know of it. And it's actually sort of where Logan Square Pets is. It's right next to the McDonald's. And it was think of Tropic Cuba. It was kind of like Tropic Cuba. But behind it, there was a Cuban scene. There was a social club behind it. And they had dance and they had music. And I've talked to some of the old timers in the neighborhood who would remember Cuban baseball players pulling up in front of Tanya's on Milwaukee Avenue and jumping out and going sort of past the grocery and convenience store section and into the club in the back. So the social functions, they sort of did follow where ethnic groups concentrated. And I do hope that we'll be able to continue to document this history. And I also hope that we'll continue to see sort of though we've lost some of these clubs, that we'll continue to see the cultural activity that that could and should exist around these spaces, rather than just these buildings becoming turning over, like the old Masonic Temple, turning over one day from Armitage Baptist Church and just becoming some large apartment building. It would be pretty tremendous to see it returned, at least in my opinion, returned to some sort of cultural asset or icon here for the neighborhood. So that really, as I said, kind of concludes my presentation on these various ethnic groups and clubs. But I'd be happy to take questions if anybody has any questions. You can chat questions.
Yes.
I guess.
Andrew?
You're unmuted.
Andrew?
Yeah.
I'm right above you. I'm iPad 3. Actually, I'm from Chicago. My father was a member of the Norska Club and Normaninis Singing Society. It was just really wonderful to see some of those pictures of then and now. Brought back a lot of memories. I have my wife with me. She grew up on Kedzie Avenue, 2411 Kedzie. Her father was a minister at the Salvation Army Church there.
Wow.
And so, the two of us have a lot of history with Logan Square, and it was just really great to see it. Can you tell me, my question is, what is Normaninis now? You told us about the Norska Club, but what is Normaninis now?
So the Normaninis building, and I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I know who I'm addressing.
Yeah, I'm Carl Johansson. I'm iPad 3.2. It says above there. I don't know why.
I see. iPad 3.2. Carl Johansson. Very well. So Normaninis was when the Normaninis. I've talked to the folks at Normaninis. They at some point decided it's very interesting. They decided that they couldn't be here in Logan Square anymore because parking was simply too difficult for people to, both their members and for people that might want to hear their concerts. Parking was just simply too hard. So they sold to the Kriya Yoga Temple and moved to the suburbs. I have since talked to them and they've said, wow, we'd really like to grow the organization, but everybody that's interested in joining us in singing lives in the city and they don't want to drive to the suburbs, which is kind of an interesting turnabout.
Yeah.
But the building, I know, frankly, I was the agent that sold that building. I sold it to an individual who's also a member of Logan Square Preservation. I know that he certainly hopes to treat it sensitively and to do some sort of cultural use there, though he has not settled on what might happen. I am confident the building is in good hands and hopefully we'll see some really positive use there. that's the best I can say. And if you're interested in messaging me or emailing me, I'd happily introduce you to him. I'm sure he'd be glad to give you a tour of the building.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Now I can remember every Sutnamai, the 17th of May, Norwegian Independence Day, my family, we would go and we would march in the parade in Humboldt Park. And later that moved to Park Ridge, actually, the parade. But we'd always go there on Easter Sunday to Normaninis because they had a big buffet, Norwegian buffet that was wonderful, sitting right under that mural that you showed us there. So,
yeah, and I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that mural come back to the community. I'd love to see it opened again.
Yeah.
Something that people could experience as a space that people could experience. I'm not sure if that's in the cards or not, but I would certainly personally hope that it is.
Yeah. And one last thing, I won't dominate anymore, but my father was a member of at the Norska Club. They had a club within a club called the Torska Club. I don't know if you know what Torska is, but that's Norwegian for codfish. And they would meet there one Saturday morning every month. They would drink akavit and skål, S-K-O-L is pronounced skål. They would skål the fish. And it was just for men on Saturday mornings. It was pretty cool because these guys would get together. They'd make codfish like they used to back in Norway and just have a great time. But thank you for all this program. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. And I mean, there's lots more information that I have about it that I could go on length. If you're, I actually was, you might be interested. This is I was given a plate this is a dinner plate.
Right. Yeah, I recognize the logo on it.
From the Norwegian Club. You end up with all these little artifacts kind of floating into your life. But I actually have done the aquavit and the
torch.
Yeah. I have done it. It didn't go down well. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to most folks, but I did try.
Yeah, it's an acquired taste.
Thank you, though. Please, send me an email. Get in touch. I'd love to hear more. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, thoughts?
You got the floor, everybody.
I don't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to thank you as well. This was amazing. I grew up in Logan Square years ago. I left in 1985, and I mean, it has always been a beautiful part of the city, and I'm so glad to see all of this, and that there is a group, preserving it. It's just amazing. It's so beautiful. So thank you so much. I enjoyed it and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I thank you very much for saying so. It's not just me. I certainly am deeply invested in it, but it's not just me. We've got a pretty robust organization that stands behind us. So I also see a question about how the Mormons got here. Jeannie, I have to be honest, I've been very curious about that myself, but it is a very closed community. The Mormon church, which is sort of right near the Minikirken there, right on Wrightwood, it has been there. I've got pictures of it when it was a sort of classic brick building, or what you might regard as a classic brick building with art glass and everything else. And then it was pushed over for that building was pushed over to build what's there today. The Mormons have been on that site for more than a century. That's great, Max. Sorry, it's my youngest. They've been there for well over a century, and now they closed the English language congregation. They still have a Spanish speaking congregation there, but they're very difficult to get in touch with, and they've sort of rebuffed any attempt to get in touch with them. I also asked, do you see a Belgian or Norwegian influence in the architecture of Logan Square? I think you'll see. Well, you certainly see that the Minikirken was designed which is our red church. And it's interesting, the red church on the square. John Drury, who was a writer, he wrote Old Chicago Houses, if anyone is familiar with that book. But it was he also wrote a segment called Old Chicago Neighborhoods for a newspaper in the 1950s called The Landlord's Record, if you can believe that as a name for a newspaper. But he wrote of Logan Square that there is no place in Chicago that has a square such as Logan Square, which has much of the charm of many of the old European squares, where it is surrounded by a large green space, surrounded by many small shops, and in one corner, an old red brick church. The Minnekirken is designed to evoke the church, the Norwegian church in Drammen, Norway. So you see that. There are a variety of places. I know there's a couple on Sawyer and Spalding south of Fullerton where you'll see Belgian-inspired cottages. So the workers' cottage, the vernacular workers' cottage is Chicago, but with the sort of Belgian look. You'll see 3 of those actually behind the Minnekirken on Sawyer north of Wrightwood. There's 3 of them in a row there that are Belgian-inspired. And then there's lots and lots of like Norwegian flourishes that you see in historic photographs, but they were largely executed in wood, and they're hard to maintain. So a lot of detailing that might have sort of been more evocative of Scandinavian culture, frankly, rotted away. So that's the story with that. Anyone else with questions? You can have the floor, or you can chat. Oh, wait, hold on. I mentioned furniture in the Baptist church. The Masons sold. Did they sell the contents? The answer is, one of the things I learned, Elizabeth asks about whether the Masons sold the contents of the church of the buildings in the Armitage Baptist Church. The Masons actually sold it to somebody else first. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but they were actually a famous Chicago family, and they ran a bingo hall out of it. And the Masons, one of the many things I learned is that the contents of these things, there's far more contents than the Masons have capacity to actually possess. So when we got that book that I showed you earlier in the photographs with all the stock certificates and photographs and things of the Logan Square temple, I reached out, and they essentially, the local Illinois Historical Association, or the archive, kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, it's better in your hands than ours. We don't really have anything that we can do with it. We don't have a place for it. And so a lot of contents were sold with the temple. I think a good chunk of that now has either been broken or cleared out, but there's still some stained glass and things like that, and furniture that continues to sort of bop around the Armitage Baptist Church. And Betsy remembers attending a bingo game there. Did you win anything? Did you win, Betsy? I don't know. There's a comma. I'm just gonna assume she won. She probably won big. Anyone else with questions? Oh, Brad, I'm sorry. Betsy's husband, Brad Reeg, attended a bingo game there. He definitely won. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, thoughts? Well, I want to say thanks to the Friends of the Logan Square Library. They've always been gracious, and Rhea has been particularly gracious at continuing to harass me to provide her with content to promote this speech. The pandemic, I'm sure, has been taxing on everyone, but juggling kids and work and then these volunteer endeavors is particularly challenging. And Rhea was patient and deliberate and indefatigable, I think is the word for it, in her pursuit of making sure that I got everything that this presentation needed over to you guys.
So if we have no more questions, gone. I want to thank Andrew. This was great. This was absolutely fascinating.
It's my pleasure. I'll come again next year with something else.
Yeah, I mean, there's an infinite number of things you could talk about, I think. Okay.
There's a lot. And then I might remind everybody, hey, it's if we want to go back to the Norwegian component of this, Setnam's coming up. I always put a Norwegian flag out in front of my house, even though I'm only partially Norwegian. I a Norwegian flag out in front of the house in honor of the neighborhood's heritage and history. That's the 17th of May. Fly a Norwegian flag and let folks know about the history of the neighborhood.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It was a wonderful program. I really enjoyed it.
You can all reach me through our website, logansquarepreservation.org. There's a page there. I know it's mentioned having history. I know that iPad 3.2 had some interesting thoughts and ideas. I'd love to hear more about your family's experience. Reach me through logansquarepreservation.org.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Great. Thanks again.